Hey guys, welcome back to Beer School. Today we're going to be jumping into the topic of cooking with beer. Beer's a lot of fun. Last week we did a lot of pairing conversations about what flavors resonate with what other flavors in the food, what kind of beer flavors contrast flavors in food, and what kind of flavors in beer complement flavors in food. So we had a lot of really cool talking points about that, but today we're going to be jumping into actually incorporating beer into the food itself instead of pairing side by side. Where that tells a story, well, the story can actually get more complicated, more complex when you actually incorporate beer into the food making process as well. So there's a lot of fun there to be had, and just like beer pairings, there's not a whole lot you can screw up whenever it comes to beer and food. But there are some pitfalls you may want to look out for and learn how to work through those pitfalls a little bit more cleverly, because keep in mind, beer has the one ingredient that not a lot of other food sources have, and that's hops. And hops have a bitterness, so you've got to account for that bitterness. Beer has acidity sometimes, so you have to account for that acidity. Beer can have intense sweetness, so you got to be mindful of that. And beer has a lot of liquid in it, so sometimes whenever you cook with beer, you have to look to render out some of that to concentrate the beer flavors and get them infused better with the food. But when it comes to cooking with beer, you can really think about it as using it instead of any other liquid that you find. We've all seen broths where you actually use a lot of water to make broths, but guess what? Beer already has a lot of flavors pushed into it from the barley, from the hops, from the yeast. So those flavors can actually make the liquid, the cooking liquid, a little bit more characterful, a little bit more intense, a little bit more rich. So you're starting off with a more flavorful ingredient to start with. A lot of times you'll see, especially in French and Italian cooking, you'll see a lot of wine incorporated into the food. Beer does the same thing, but beer also has that bitterness, which gives you another level of complexity that wine can't give you. So beer is really friendly whenever it comes to cooking with beer. And I'm going to go through some examples with you, kind of give you guys an idea, a guideline about why beer works with food and how you can actually incorporate it in there. And we're going to start with the basic preparations of like marinades. Anytime you have a meat or a vegetable and you kind of want to marinate it with some sort of liquid, you use some olive oils and use some other wet ingredients, whether it's be mustards, the ketchups, whatever. Beer can be one of those elements as well. One thing I like about beer and a marinade is beer does have acid in it, even though it's not a sour ale necessarily. All beers have a certain measure of acidity, which helps to break down the fibers in the food and makes them more tender. The bubbles in the beer does something similar. It helps to massage, helps to tenderize the meats, helps to tenderize the vegetables a little bit, and make the other flavors infuse into those fibers a little bit more readily. So the bubbles and the carbonation really does assist with that. And the alcohol itself helps to kind of break down, helps as a preserving technique in the food. So you get a lot of benefits of that. Sour ales, if you start with a sour ale, they're really good, but you want to go with a quick marinade on that, anywhere from 30 minutes to 4 hours. Anytime you're using a sour ale like a Berliner Weiss or a Lambic or a Goza, I would not go particularly long with those. But those are mild flavored beers, so you're going to cook a mild mannered food option with that, which is going to be vegetables, it's going to be chicken, which is going to be maybe a ceviche, maybe shrimp, maybe you're cooking in that. So you're actually going to infuse the beer into those elements, along with some of the vinegars, along with some of the olive oils and some of the other ingredients, spices and herbs that you use there. So that quick marinade. If you're looking for something like a longer marinade, let's say you're doing beef tips, pork shoulders, something a little bit more hearty, something a little bit more rich, you can go with a little bit stronger of a beer. You can go with a porter, you can go with a brown ale, you can go with a stout, you can go with a Belgian quad. You get these really big flavors there, and those can go overnight. So you can actually put those in some sort of brine and set it aside and let that go and infuse overnight. When it comes to some of your more delicate foods, sometimes you think of things like rice. Don't be afraid to incorporate beer into rice. One of the things I like to do is use the very floral Pilsner and sort of pour it into the rice and cook it that way, so the flavors of the Pilsner infuses the rice. The rice is kind of a blank slate, a blank canvas, and it really takes on its flavors really easily. So the floral attributes of the Pilsner actually infuse into the rice, especially like a jasmine rice. It really makes the jasmine rice seem more fragrant, more floral, more flavorful. So I like doing those sort of things. When it comes to poaching, you poach fish. We all know how you poach fish and then water and maybe butter. But you can also do a beer that way too and bring out a little bit more of the character there. Go saisons. You can go triples on some of that and be pretty easy. Boiled chicken, particularly characterful in Thai dishes. something a little bit more hearty, like a triple, like a saison. You can boil the chicken in that pretty easy. One of my favorites is ramen. So anytime you start with a ramen dish, really think if it's going to be a miso broth, you use a little bit of miso paste. And you can put that with something like a cream ale or with a pilsner there as well, something really light, maybe a Belgian pale ale that's not too alcoholic. And you can actually boil those and kind of bring those flavors together to make the broth really, really nice. If you're using a beef broth, go bigger, go with the brown ale, go with those porters, go with something a little bit darker, a little bit more richer, something that really informs the caramelization of the meat with the caramelization of the beer. So those things work out real well. When it comes to braising techniques, those are really neat too. If you're going to braise like a chicken piccata dish, that's a famous Italian capers, white wine sauce, that white wine's fine, but you can also use a sour ale with that. You can use a goza or a kettle sour that's not too terribly intense to really make that braising character real well. Go a little bit heavier, go with short ribs. Go with something like a rib roast. You can actually let those things braise in a tomato-based sauce with a little bit stronger. You can use your Belgian doubles there. You can use like an Aventinus, Weissenbach, and so those flavors really do make the meat seem sweeter, makes it really intense, makes it really juicy, and does all those things we've already talked about. Saucing up your dishes a little bit. You can actually take the beer, you can pour it in a little pan and reduce it in the presence of other sugars. All beer is going to have a little bit of bitterness. So when it comes to sauces, as you're rendering that stuff down, the bitterness has to intensify just like a lot of other flavors do. So if you're going to take something like a sour cherry ale, creek or something like that, and render that down, you may pick up a little bit of bitterness on that, which would be great for like a balsamic reduction with a Flanders red ale over top of greens that have a natural bitterness built in. So you get that bitterness of the greens, the bitterness of the beer, what little bit is there, they really inform each other quite well. One of the things I really like is, if you render down something like a barley wine and you do pick up a little bit of bitterness out of that, you can always add a little bit of sugar. You can add all those pantry ingredients to have to balance out the flavors there really well. Quads do a really nice job with that too. And what you can do is you can render that stuff down to about half its liquid, and you can use that as a drizzle over everything else. You can actually, once that stuff becomes a little bit sticky and a little bit thicker, you can use it as a barbecue sauce. Take it out to the grill. Do the chicken on the grill and just sort of base that stuff off, and to let the caramelized flavors just really attach to the chicken, to the pork chops, to the meat, whatever you're using there, and that goes really well. Beers, you can actually use them really well as vinaigrettes. That's where your IPAs come into play. With a little bit of bitterness, a little bit of acid from those hops, and the really highly floral characteristic goes real well with some of those other lemons or lime or whatever the kind of herb that you would normally put into a vinaigrette. Beer works real well there too. Something I enjoy doing is putting basically half beer, half water, some other herbs and seasonings into a spray bottle. And if I'm on the grill doing something like an herb chicken, I'll actually spray the chicken right there on the grill and kind of let the caramelization happen. Flip it, let that work for a few minutes, and spray again. Just keep doing that over and over and over until the internal temperature of that chicken reaches, the 165 or so, wherever you need that to go. So that can actually be pretty good. 185 is actually where I like to take chicken thighs. It makes it really juicy and really tender. A little high heat on that is really nice. So you got that going for you. And also something I like to do with IPAs, I like to brine with them. A good brining liquid, basically for pickles, for quick pickles. For fermented foods like kimchis, you can actually use a little bit of brining liquid in the kimchi, especially if the beer already has some natural bacteria, natural yeast still alive in there, like some of your bottle-conditioned Belgian ales. So that can actually kickstart the kimchi process instead of getting that straightforward lactic fermentation that's probably available in your kitchen. You can actually get some other types of fermentation characteristics coming through in some of those yeasts and some of those bacteria that's naturally in those bottle-conditioned beers to work in your favor as well. So don't be afraid to go ahead and use a beer to actually start the kimchi process or that quick pickling process. IPA is really good. IPAs, vinegar, water, some of your pickling spices. Just heat it up on the stove, get everything dissolved, come together, pour it over onions, pour it over garlic, pour it over cucumbers, and just let that stuff sit for a couple hours. That's basically all you need for a nice picnic snack. Or just a couple of minutes to put on a sandwich or so. But the beer food is not very complicated. You just got to think very diligently about what kind of character is in the beer and how to forecast it to the flavor of the food and really what your intent is with it. Do you want it a sauce? Do you want it a marinade? Do you want to poach in it? Do you want to braise in it? Do you want to use it in a no-cook environment like a brining environment or a spritz environment? and vinaigrette kind of thing. So you get a lot of playful activity that comes with beer, and since beer has so many flavors that are already familiar with food, the pairing concept works out really well when it comes to putting which beer with which food. Something I like, we'll go through some examples here I really like real well. A pale ale is pretty much a standard braising liquid that I like to use a lot of times when it comes to pork. The reason why it's got some caramelization, you're actually using caramel malts in this beer to make the beer taste a little bit like caramel, offsets that bitterness in the beer as well. And so the caramelization really likes to attach to meats and vegetables really well, and when you grill them, it makes that sear happen so much quicker because sugar has a tendency to sear fast. So you get that sear working in your favor very quickly if you use a beer that has some caramelized effects going on. IPAs, even an Imperial IPA and that quick pickle brine would work really well, or that vinaigrette. You don't have to go light on the IPA. You don't have to go very floral on the IPA. Whenever it comes to cooking with those kind of things, I like a very stiff, very hearty IPA, something 8, 9, 10% alcohol. Uses alcohol as a way to kind of render down the fibers of the food a little bit, and really assist those really piney herbal notes. Sometimes IPAs have this very strong gin component, and so gin is also a liqueur that I like to cook with. You really want that deep caramelization, like on your rib tips and really strong ribeye roast. Get you a nice hearty brown ale, porter, stout. Samuel Smith nut brown is very favorable. I like this a lot. It's gentle enough so it doesn't overpower the food, but yet it's strong enough where it really does give you an element of surprise that you didn't see coming. If you want more punch than a brown ale, go with something big coffee, big cocoa flavors. You're making that chili at home. Something like the breakfast stout by Founders goes real well as part of the liquid that goes in with the tomatoes. So those kind of renders down and it gives you those flavors. A lot of people are already putting coffee or chocolate into the chili to give it a little bit of a robust characteristic. This beer will do the same thing along with some other added components that those ingredients alone won't give you. Aventinus, this is a Weissenbach, really good fruity notes. So if you're looking for something like a little bit of a reduction or something like a little bit more French, where you would use a little bit of a wine, you want those fruit notes from the wine to really stand up. The fruit notes in a beer like this already has those port, sherry, Madeira notes coming through, so those are actually inform the dish just as well as those wines do, and maybe a little bit better. It's got a little bit of viscosity, got a little bit of maltiness to it, and give you a little bit more body in the food there. So Berliner Weiss for those sour ales, for those kimchis, for those chicken marinades. I like a Berliner Weiss because it is a little sharper. It has a little bit better of an edge to it than a Goza does, and some of your kettle sours. Not overly alcoholic, but the acids in these beers work out exceptionally well. So I really like these in some of those piccata type dishes. Big barley wine. This beer always has a lot of that rendered stuff going on, so you can actually render this down to something very sweet. You can actually add a touch of sugar to this, render it down a little bit, maybe a touch of cornstarch and some water. Get it, don't make a paste out of it, but create this drizzle even for ice cream. So even whenever it comes to cooking with food, don't take dessert off the plate either. Those are excellent options there. And also for a nice vinaigrette, you went from a vinaigrette to a balsamic reduction, you got a Flanders Red, and the Petrus H Red is very similar to the Flanders Red style, so those go exceptionally well. So like I said, pour this into a pan, give some sugar, maybe if you want to do some other herbs and stuff, maybe some honey, and let that reduce down to about half its thickness. That makes a really nice drizzle there. Or you can use this as a red wine vinaigrette alongside of your acids like vinegar on a summer salad or so. Some of your more earthy lambics, feel free to give those things a good steam bath with mussels. Let that character of the lambic really infuse the earthiness of those mussels particularly well. That's one of my favorite pairings. Or Val, the Trappist ale from Belgium, does really well in that regard also. So you can tell there's a lot of fun you can have with beer and food. I encourage you to turn on your stove, go grab some food, set something on fire, and then render this stuff down and tell me how it goes. I appreciate your attention, and you guys have a great Father's Day.